Brandon's voice sliced through the empty gym like a blade. "Hey, you." "Yeah, the janitor. Come entertain us for a minute." 8 students turned their heads as the white instructor pointed at Keisha, the black woman quietly mopping near the mat. His smirk widened. "Come on, it's just for fun. Unless you're scared. If this already made your blood boil, tap like, and subscribe so you don't miss stories where justice finally wins." Keisha's hands paused on the mop handle. She wasn't new to disrespect. But something about the way Brandon dragged out the words, "just a janitor," made the air feel heavier than the humid gym floor. She didn't look up, didn't react, just kept cleaning the stubborn mark on the mat like she didn't even hear him. That bothered him. He wasn't used to being ignored. Brandon stepped closer, the slap of his bare feet echoing. "I'm talking to you. Don't act like you're better than this place." One of the younger students shifted uncomfortably. "Sensei, maybe we should just wrap up?" Brandon shot him a glare. The kid went dead silent. He pointed again at Keisha. "Get on the mat. I'll teach you something real. Show these kids why some people clean floors and others earn black belts." Keisha finally raised her eyes. Calm, steady, no tremble, no anger. Just a look so still it made 2 students glance at each other. "Sir," she said quietly, "I'm working. Let me finish." Her voice wasn't defensive. It wasn't scared. It was controlled. Too controlled. Brandon scoffed. "Look at her acting tough. You think wiping sweat off mats makes you special? Come on, 5 minutes. A simple demonstration." He raised his voice to the students, playing to his audience. This is a perfect example of why hierarchy matters. Some people train, others just clean. A few students forced awkward laughs, but none of them were laughing with him. They were laughing because they didn't know what else to do. Keisha set the mop down slowly. The gym lights reflected off the polished floor as she straightened up, her posture too fluid for someone who spent years bending over janitorial work. She didn't step forward, but she didn't step back either. The students felt it first. A shift, a tension they couldn't name yet. Brandon didn't notice, but he would. She turned her head slightly, one eyebrow lifting just enough to communicate something he wasn't ready to understand. Respect or consequences? His choice. "Sir," she said again, "don't turn this place into something it's not." But he grinned, already too deep in his arrogance to pull back. "Sweetheart," he said, "I decide what this place is." And that was his first mistake. As Keisha stepped a single inch closer to the mat, something shifted in the room. Not loud, not dramatic, just a tiny change in her posture. So subtle most people would miss it, but the students felt it. A calmness that didn't match someone being mocked. A familiarity with pressure, like she'd stood in far bigger arenas than this one. Something about her didn't add up. If this happened in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you stand for fairness, hit subscribe. Brandon folded his arms. Try and maintain control of the moment. "Look at her trying to act brave now," he said, pacing in circles like he owned the floor. "You don't belong here. This is a martial arts academy, not a charity shift." Keisha didn't speak, didn't defend herself. She simply breathed. A soft, steady inhale. A slow, controlled exhale. Not the breath of a janitor embarrassed in front of a crowd, but the breath of someone trained to stay calm when everything around them was collapsing. One of the girls on the bench leaned toward her friend. "Why does she stand like that? That's not normal." Her friend whispered back, "I don't know, but she doesn't look scared at all." Brandon continued pushing. "That's right, everyone. Real confidence comes from training, discipline, technique, not from mopping floors. Watch and learn." He walked right up to Keisha, close enough that she could smell the sweat from his last round. "You want respect? Earn it. Step onto the mat." She looked at him again, not with fear, not with anger, but with a strange sadness. A sadness that felt old, like she'd seen this exact kind of man 100 times before. "Why?" she asked quietly. The single word threw him off. "What do you mean, why?" Brandon shot back. "Because I said so." "No," she replied. "Why do you need this?" What are you trying to prove? Her voice wasn't mocking, but it cut deeper than any insult he could have thrown at her. Students shifted again. A couple glanced toward the exit, unsure if they were supposed to stay. Brandon clenched his jaw. Enough talking. If you think you're better than me, step forward. She didn't step. She didn't retreat. She just stood there quietly analyzing him. Her eyes lowered briefly, not in submission but in calculation. One student noticed and whispered, "She's watching his stance, like she knows what he'll do." Brandon didn't hear them. He was too busy feeding his ego. "Last chance, janitor," he said. "Get on the mat." Keisha closed her eyes for 1 second, and in that single second, her entire energy shifted. The kind of shift that happens before storms. Quiet, heavy, and impossible to ignore. When she opened her eyes, something inside them had changed. And for the first time, Brandon felt a flicker of doubt. He ignored it. He shouldn't have. Keisha finally stepped onto the mat, just 1 foot. But the moment her heel touched the surface, the room reacted before Brandon did. The students went silent, her posture aligned, shoulders leveled, weight centered. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. But it was perfect. Too perfect for someone who just cleans. If you believe talent can silence every insult, share this video. And to everyone watching from US, UK, and Canada, your voice matters. Brandon tried to laugh it off, but it came out thin. "Oh, please, standing straight doesn't make you a fighter," he said, rolling his eyes. "Relax, janitor. Don't pull a muscle." But his voice didn't match his words. Something inside him had registered the danger. Keisha said nothing. She simply adjusted her feet. A tiny pivot, barely noticeable. But the students leaned forward as if pulled by gravity. It was the kind of movement only trained bodies made. Efficient, quiet, deadly accurate. One of the older students whispered, "Sensei, I think she knows what she's doing." Brandon snapped. "She knows how to clean floors, that's it." But even he didn't believe himself anymore. He pointed at the center of the mat. "Fine. You want respect? Show me a basic guard. Let's see what a mop expert has learned." He moved in, expecting fear, a flinch, a tremble, something. But Keisha's eyes didn't even blink. She watched him approach with the stillness of someone reading a familiar book. His stance, his balance, his shoulders lifting before each move. She already knew his next 3 actions before he made them. Brandon threw a light feint, testing her. She didn't move. He frowned. He feinted again. Still nothing. "I said guard up." Brandon barked. Finally, Keisha lifted her hands. Not in panic, not in clumsy imitation, but in a guard so tight, so efficient, so fundamentally correct that 3 students instinctively straightened their posture, recognizing real technique when they saw it. Brandon froze for a split second. He recognized the stance too. No beginner learned that. No janitor learned that. No casual fighter could even fake that. Where did you learn that?" he asked, confusion crawling into his voice. Keisha didn't answer. She simply tilted her chin upward, barely an inch, challenging him without saying a word. The challenge hit harder than a punch. Brandon felt something unfamiliar tighten in his throat. Not anger, not pride, fear. He covered it quickly. "All right," he said, stepping back into his own stance. "You want to play? Let's play." He launched the first real strike. Keisha moved. Not fast, not flashy, but with precision that made time feel slower. She wasn't reacting. She was predicting. And every student in the room suddenly understood. This wasn't janitor. This was someone dangerous. Brandon had no idea what kind of storm he had just awakened. Brandon pushed forward with the confidence of a man who'd spent years teaching beginners to fear him. His first punch was clean. Fast enough to impress his students, sharp enough to bruise a rookie. He expected Keisha to flinch, stumble, panic something. She didn't. Keisha leaned her head a few inches to the side. Not rushed, not startled. Just a smooth slip that made Brandon's fist cut through nothing but air. The speed of her reaction wasn't what stunned the students. It was the ease. Brandon hadn't even finished his follow-through before Keisha shifted her weight again, stepping out of range with a calm precision that felt practiced. Too practiced. Brandon frowned, irritated. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, resetting his feet. He threw a second punch, then a third, then a fourth. Everyone found the same opponent. Empty space. Keisha remained grounded, balanced, unshaken. She didn't counter, didn't strike, didn't show off. She simply moved with the confidence of someone who knew she didn't need to prove anything. One student whispered, "Sensei, she's reading you." Brandon pretended not to hear. He stepped back, breath tightening slightly. "All right, enough. Guard up for real this time." He launched a jab-cross combo, his reliable chain, the one he used to intimidate every newcomer who dared to challenge him. Keisha's response, a gentle drop of her shoulder, a half-step pivot, and Brandon's fist sliced past her again. She wasn't dodging randomly. She was dismantling him without using a single strike. The gym fell silent as Brandon grew more frustrated. His movements grew sharper, louder. He stomped the mat. He exhaled hard. He threw a hook that should have forced Keisha to block. She didn't block. She ducked under it like the air itself parted for her. Brandon stumbled, off balance for the first time. His students watched their instructor, the man who preached discipline and dominance, fail to connect with even a single touch. Keisha straightened, eyes steady. "Your left side is open," she said softly. Brandon's face flushed. "You don't get to correct me," he snapped. He rushed her, no technique now, just ego, a sloppy combination. Wild shoulders, telegraph moves. Keisha stepped to the side, letting him pass like he wasn't even a threat. She didn't push him, didn't trip him, didn't humiliate him. She simply let his own momentum punish him. Brandon caught himself on the mat, barely keeping his balance. The students stared, stunned. One girl whispered, "Why isn't she hitting back?" "Because she didn't need to." Keisha looked at Brandon, not with superiority, but with something deeper, something familiar to anyone who had ever mastered craft. Restraint. The kind of restraint only true fighters possessed. Brandon tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. "What are you?" he demanded. Keisha didn't blink. "I warned you," she said quietly. "Respect the mat." And for the first time since he'd earned his black belt, Brandon felt like the student. A sudden gasp rippled through the gym when one of the students, Jenny, stopped mid-scroll on her phone. Her face drained of color. Her eyes widened. And when she looked up at Keisha standing calmly on the mat, she looked like she'd just seen a ghost from a highlight reel. "If this happened in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you stand for fairness, hit subscribe." Jenny held her phone like it was fragile. "Sensei, you need to see this," she whispered, voice trembling. Brandon didn't look. He didn't want to. Keisha didn't turn toward her either. She just kept her gaze on Brandon, steady, patient, almost disappointed. Jenny finally stood, unable to keep quiet. Her name is Keisha. Keisha Malone, former welterweight champion, 8-year undefeated streak. Retired after an incident nobody talks about. The room froze. Brandon's fake confidence cracked instantly. He tried to force a laugh, but it sounded broken. "No, that's impossible. She's a janitor." Jenny shook her head. "Not just any fighter. A legend. People still study your matches," she said, this time addressing Keisha directly. The other students circled closer, their earlier discomfort turning into pure awe. They weren't watching a cleaning lady being bullied anymore. They were witnessing a master walking through an old battlefield. Brandon's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Why would someone like you be doing this job?" Keisha finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "Because sometimes life isn't about glory. Sometimes it's about surviving what the world throws at you." Her eyes didn't show pride. They showed history. Brandon swallowed hard. His hands trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the realization that he'd mocked someone who operated on a level far beyond his reach. But embarrassment wasn't enough. He needed to feel the consequence. Keisha took one step closer, slow and deliberate. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to work. But you chose humiliation over leadership. You chose ego over respect. She pointed at the mat. Now your students have learned it more in 10 minutes than you've taught them in years. The students shifted awkwardly, glancing at each other. Some nodded. Some couldn't meet Brandon's eyes. All of them knew she was right. Jenny lifted her phone. Keisha, do you want this video deleted? Keisha shook her head. No, let the truth stay where it belongs. Brandon felt the sentence land harder than any punch. Truth, not violence, not revenge. Truth, and he had no defense against that. The gym lights flickered slightly as if even the building understood that something irreversible had just happened. Keisha wasn't the janitor anymore. She was a storm he had awakened. The next morning, the gym owner's phone buzzed nonstop. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages, a link sent repeatedly, the video. By noon, every major martial arts forum in the U.S. had reposted it, not for the spectacle, but for the humiliation. Black belt gets dismantled by janitor. Former champion emerges out of nowhere. Ego meets reality on the mat. Brandon walked into the gym late, hoping nobody had seen it. But the moment he stepped inside, every student went quiet. Their eyes told him everything. They didn't see a sensei. They saw a bully who got exposed. The owner stepped out of his office. His face wasn't angry, just deeply disappointed. My phone hasn't stopped ringing since last night, he said. Parents, students, reporters, even the regional board. Brandon tried to defend himself. It was just a misunderstanding. No, the owner cut in. A misunderstanding is misspelling a name on a membership card. What you did was public humiliation, racism, abuse of authority, and she gave you every chance to stop. Brandon lowered his eyes. Shame spread across his face. The owner sighed. I built this place to teach discipline and respect. But your behavior, it's the opposite of everything martial arts stands for. He handed Brandon a paper. Not a warning, not a suspension, a termination form. Brandon felt the weight of it like a punch to the ribs. I've been here 8 years, and she dismantled everything you pretended to be in 8 minutes, the owner said. Clean out your locker. Across the room, students whispered. Some shook their heads. A few recorded quietly, capturing the end of an era built on intimidation. Meanwhile, Keisha walked in for her shift with her usual calm. No spotlight, no ego, just a bucket and mop. Students stood straighter when they saw her, like soldiers watching a decorated veteran pass by. One of them, a young girl, stepped forward nervously. Ms. Keisha, could you maybe teach us sometime? Not fighting, just how you stay so calm. Keisha smiled gently. Calm isn't something you learn from winning. It's something you earn from surviving. The owner approached her. You know, if you ever want to trade that mop for a coaching spot, the offer is open. Your presence alone changed this entire gym. She shook her head softly. Maybe someday, but today I'm just here to work. No, Jenny said from behind her. Today you reminded us what real strength looks like. Brandon left the gym through the side door, had bowed, his career collapsing in silence. Keisha didn't watch him go. She didn't need to. Justice had already walked out with him. 3 days later, the gym felt different. Calmer, brighter, almost respectful. And as Keisha finished wiping down the last bench, a quiet truth settled in the room. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it arrives like a whisper that changes everything forever. If you believe talent can silence every insult, share this video. And to everyone watching from the US, UK, and Canada, your voice matters. A small group of students waited near the edge of the mat, shifting nervously like kids about to speak to a hero they'd only seen in clips online. One finally stepped forward. Ms. Keisha, would you stay for a minute? We wanted to thank you, not for what you did to Sensei, but for what you showed us. Keisha set her cleaning rag aside. And what's that? That strength doesn't need shouting, he said. It just needs truth. The others nodded. One girl added, we realized we followed someone who taught fear, but you taught something in 10 minutes he never did in years. Keisha didn't smile or boast. She simply placed a mop against the wall. That lesson wasn't mine, she said. It belonged to the mat. It always teaches what ego tries to hide. The gym owner walked over, arms crossed but expression soft. I meant what I said earlier. If you ever feel ready to teach, whether it's technique, philosophy, or just dignity, you have a place here. Keisha glanced at the students, their hopeful faces, the quiet respect that hadn't existed a week ago. Maybe someday, she replied, but today my job is enough. Jenny stepped forward, hesitating. I submitted the video to a small blog about martial arts ethics. It's already getting traction. People are talking about humility, racism, accountability. Not gossip, change. Keisha took a breath, steady and warm. If it helps one person think twice before disrespecting someone, let it spread. Outside the gym window, Brandon passed by the sidewalk, carrying a cardboard box from his car. No students followed him. No one asked for advice. He didn't lift his head. He was learning the hardest lesson of his life. Arrogance collapses faster than it rises. Keisha didn't go to the window. She didn't comment. She simply returned to stacking mats, her movements quiet, deliberate, peaceful. One of the students helped her without being asked. Another held the door as she carried the last mop bucket out. Respect, not forced, earned. As she locked up for the night, the gym lights reflected off the freshly clean floor, a silent reminder that even the most ordinary footsteps can belong to someone extraordinary. And sometimes, the strongest warriors are the ones who no longer need to fight.